Okay, so to address some of these errors, I think the best thing to do would be to keep moving forward, and we'll get to them. So the next thing we need to do is create pie chart, something called pie chart view. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm going to come here and create a new file called the SwiftUI view. We'll call it pie chart view. Okay, and it's just a SwiftUI view, and we're going to have to put a few things inside of it. So first, I'm going to create environment object. We're going to bring the global environment into this one. Global environment. Okay, we'll say let chart size. It'll be of type CG float. It's going to be equal to 200. So we're creating the pie chart here. And we're going to create a function called path. And path is how we can draw images, or we can draw things like we can draw, instead of just like drawing saying circle, we can draw like maybe an arc of a circle, and that's how we do pie charts. So this function, essentially, we're going to expect it to return a path, and it needs to be fed a clock. So clock. Okay, and we're going to first create a variable called start angle, and it's going to be equal to 0 at baseline. And then we're going to say, well, and that start angle is going to change whether we're working on the first timer, the second timer, the third timer, and you'll see what we mean. So I'm going to come here and say that we're going to say if let this clock index equals self dot env dot clocks dot first index, or first index where, then we're going to say dot id equals clock dot id. So if this is not nil, that we're saying if let, so we're unwrapping an optional, we'll say start angle is going to be equal to get start angle. Well, we don't actually have that function in yet, so get start angle, and then let's go ahead and create that function. So I guess the best way to start doing that, the best way to do that would be, we're going to go over to our functions. We're going to need to add a few things here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a function called get start angle. And if you can imagine, when you're creating a pie chart, let's pretend you have one segment that covers 1/3 of the pie chart and the other one covers 2/3. Well, you have to draw from the starting angle of maybe a flat line over to the end angle of, let's say, if it's a third, or 120 degrees. Well, the next one needs to start at 120 degrees and end at 360. So the starting angle is different. So we'll say get start angle, and we need to be able, the way this is going to work is we're going to feed it a list of clocks, and we're going to feed it an int. And we're going to expect it to return a double. Start by saying var return val is going to be equal to 0. We'll say if I is greater than 0, so for clock index in 0 dot dot less than I, we're going to return val. Return val is going to be plus equal to double clock index. I'll tell you what this means all in just a moment. Dot time segments dot sum all segments. Okay, and so let's see what it's telling us. It doesn't like the fact that why doesn't it like this? Let's see. Double sum all segments. Let's see what it's saying. Well, it doesn't like the fact that this right here needs to say double. So it needs to know that return value is supposed to be a double. So what we're saying is, the way we're gonna create our pie chart is we're gonna go, task by task and create the wedges that go into the pie chart, and our start angle is gonna change accordingly. So what we're doing is we're finding out where in the list of all of our tasks for the wedges that we're gonna be creating, where are we? And what it's doing is it's running through where we are. It's saying for every clock we've already finished. So for clock index in 0 ... less than I. So for instance, if we're working on the second wedge, then it would be 0 ... less than 2, meaning wedge number 0 and wedge number 1. Then it'll try to figure out how big those wedges were, and it's adding those ratios onto a return val. Okay, and then we'll come down here and we'll say return val is going to be equal to double return val divided by, that's kind of it's kind of unnecessary. We don't have to do that. We can just say double clocks dot sum all clocks, and then we'll say return. Sorry, we should come here, bring that outside of our parenthesis or our curly bracket. So right here, it's outside of the if, and we'll say return val. So what we're doing is we're saying, for instance, let's pretend we had 100 units of time that were used up in amongst all of our tasks, and we're essentially saying, hey, figure out for all the clocks up until the one that for the wedge we're drawing right now, figure out how many units we've used, add them all up, and divide it by the entire number of units used amongst all our clocks, aka find what fraction of the pie chart has already been filled, okay? And then we're going to return that value in the form of a decimal or a double. Okay, and while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and just create one other function. It's going to be called current time underscore formatted, and this is going to let us create really nice formatted text from dates. Okay, so we're going to be using this later, and I don't want to open up this file again, so we'll be done modifying the functions file after this. So what we're going to do is we're going to say let formatter equal date formatter. If you are interested about learning more about formatting and date formatter and dates and dealing with dates, you can actually, I have a tutorial all about that on my channel. You can search for that. And so we're formatter dot time zone. It's going to be equal to time zone. We have to give it identifier. We have to give it a time zone for our formatting. Let's say formatter dot date format. It's going to be equal to. You can kind of set the format for it. So this is me just telling it how to present our date to us in string form. Now this is like a pretty big topic, so there's a whole video I made dedicated just to that, so you can find that on my channel. But this is how we're going to set it, and you'll see what this will return. It's setting a standard format for the dates we'll get back. We'll say return formatter dot string from date, and all this is doing is saying, hey, we can feed it a date and it'll spit back the string form in this format. Okay, we'll never have to touch the functions file again. That's it for that. So now we can go back to the pie chart view. So we're going to come here and say start angle, and we're going to say that's going to be equal to get start angle of the clock will be self.env.clocks. So that's the list of clocks it's going to have to run through to figure out how far we are in. And this clock index is the one that we are currently creating the wedge for. And we have to multiply that by 360. Okay. So let's see. Of course, it wants us to specify that this is supposed to be a double. There we go. So we're saying, hey, get the fraction or the ratio of all the wedges that we've drawn so far, and multiply it by 360. That tells you kind of the new starting angle based on all the wedges that we've drawn up to this point. Let's go down here. We'll say let numerator equal double clock dot time segments dot sum all segments. Okay, and we're creating a numerator and a denominator. It's going to be equal to double self.env.clocks dot sum all clocks. And so what we're saying here is we're going to create a numerator and denominator. These will tell us precisely how big the wedge should be in our entire pie chart. And we'll say var path is going to be equal to path. And I'll just go down here and say return path so that we can get rid of this error. And then we'll come up here and we'll say path.move to, and we're going to move it to CG point. And that point will just be chart size divided by 2. And we're moving to the center of the chart size divided by 2. Okay, and then we'll go to path.add r. And the one we want is the one that includes, excuse me, this one right here, the center, radius, start angle, end angle, and clockwise. And then we'll come here and say our center is going to be the same principle. So I like to actually write in this fashion. It's easier to read later. Come here and go like this. Okay. That way you can kind of follow along and see where we're at. And then we'll come here and say the radius is going to be chart size divided by 2. Start angle will be angle, degrees, and that'll be start angle. The end angle is going to be angle, degrees, and it'll be the start angle plus 360 times the numerator divided by the denominator. So that's not too complex of math. That's really, and then we'll come here and just say, we'll come here and say false. Okay, and we forgot to put the center in there as well. The center is just going to be the same thing as this. Okay, so by the way, the end angle, just to make sure you guys are on the same page, the end angle is just saying, hey, the end angle is the start angle plus whatever size the wedge should be, which is the numerator divided by the denominator times 360, which essentially is just the numerator being how much time was dedicated to this task divided by the denominator, which is how much time is across all of the tasks. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now we'll go down to the body. Body's even easier to write out. It's just going to be a z stack. And I'm going to come here and just say dot frame width, chart size, and the height will be chart size. Okay, and we'll say 4 each. And then we don't want to add anything to, I mean, we want to make this as computationally efficient as possible. So we're going to say for each, we'll say self dot env dot clocks. Let's start with that. Okay, we'll say clock in, and then we'll add, for each clock we'll add a path, and that'll be clock, and then the fill of that will be clock.color.instance.opacity 0.5. Okay, and I'm gonna go here and say, to make this not computationally intensive, we're just gonna say dot filter. We only want to include the clocks that have actually been used today. So dot time segments dot sum all segments greater than 0, meaning that you have to have at least 1 second of use to show up on this pie chart. Okay, so that page is completely done now. So let's see what we got next. Realistically, the next thing we'll need to do is we're going to need to modify the dashboard view to make sure we include this pie chart. We'll go to the dashboard view, and we'll go to the top. The main thing we want to do now is we want to just go down to here, add pie chart view. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the history tab. So let's look at, just make sure we don't have any errors that we need to deal with really quick. So let's start with this one. Let's just get rid of the preview. We don't need the preview. We could put default values, but it's not worth it right now. We need to give, let's go ahead and get rid of preview once more, not worth it. Okay, and that gets rid of most of them. The other thing it doesn't like is saying result values, expression have mismatching types, clock.colors, and color. So we're going to give it a default value color-wise of, let's just say, dot blue, dot black. Or we can just go ahead and say clock colors dot gen 1. That should work. Dot instance. We'll go up here and do the same thing here. Dot instance. It's the difference between using colors and using our clock colors class. Okay. So that if we save it and run it, everything should run so far. Okay, and so the things we have left to do now, we need to create the history rows and the history row views.